Hey folks, MasakoX here. Now when you look at the title and then compare it to what you've seen in our reviews and podcasts as of late, which you can cheekily check out by subscribing to our second channel up on the lookout by the way, to get them as soon as possible, you might be surprised by what I'm saying today. We quite like the Heeters, but yet there's something a little amiss going on with them. Sure, their strongest member, Gas, whom we had lamented for being quite generic and bland for a long time now, has suddenly come alive. In this latest chapter, he has the bit between his teeth and is starting to embrace the powers he has been granted by his brother and uses his rather impressive and quite intriguing techniques to get by. Surely this kind of villain is one you wouldn't be forgetting in a hurry, right? Right? Well, let's talk about that, folks. And let us tell you about why we ultimately think he is destined for the Dragon Ball scrap heap. I know it's a little weird to hear from us, but whilst we can find the best in any character within Dragon Ball, we do have to be realistic sometimes when it comes to the long-term memorability. Will these characters, the Heeters, be instantly recognizable in a few years' time? Or even by this time next year, when the next big bad and the next saga shows up? It's hard to say. And besides, it's been a while since we've had a conversation with you all about the Heeters, so we felt that this was the right moment to do so. After all, the fact that the Heeter's very name is the exact opposite of Frieza's is just... It's probably one of the smartest name puns I've seen from Dragon Ball in a long time. But don't let that make you think that they're getting out of this one with that little bit of wordplay. You know, as much as their name would suggest, the Heeters have, on the whole, not been such a hot topic within the Dragon Ball community. Sure, there are plenty of people who both like them and don't like them, but this is not a controversial group of characters. It's a safe group that people would have a burning passion for though, still. They are not the kind of characters who make iconic decisions or actions based on what we've seen. They started off quite compelling, being somewhat divergent from the typical villain within the show, relying on knowledge and information instead of brute strength to get by, instead of just going punchy. Although they do use it sort of in the form of hired goons. That being said, the people who are not really fond of them tend to, and rightly so, point out that a lot of their design choices remind us of a different group of pirates within Dragon Ball, them having a very similar look and feel about them, and especially with the quite recent revelations of their inner powers being unlocked and having transformations. Oh, and, being blue and all that. It's both cool and a shame to see it pan out that way. I really like that base drives and mission statement, but the more we saw of them, the less unique they became. And now you can definitely say, without debate, that they are Bojack facsimiles, plain and simple, just without the love of German architecture. No joke, that's what Bojack pointed out in the dub. But we have to be fair here. The fans of theirs do point out that they are in fact a very different type of villain. There are still some traits about them which are enough to differentiate themselves wholly from Bojack's posse. Something, in fact, that has not really been seen in the series that much. A group of enemies that, up to a point, were not a physical threat. At all. The difference here is that the Heron Squad led by Bojack always had the power to beat down their enemies, and then when things got tough, they could just up their power instantly, even more, with their green forms. Instead of green hair with Broly, we got green skin with Bojack. I wonder if there's a fan art of buffed up Zanya out there with that kind of power. There probably is, I know how a lot of you operate. For the Heeters, for the longest time, they were not capable of fighting all of them. Gas was their sole grunt for doing that kind of stuff. And sure, we have your Barbadies, we have your Moros, as well as a plethora of OG Dragon Ball baddies who could be described similarly to the Heeters. But it all ended up with martial arts winning out in the end. Well, this happened here as well, with Gas getting his glow up and grow up. And while Gas has a lot going for him right now in the story, having finally gained some semblance of personality, he is going to be one of those characters that we'll take a look back on in 10 years or so, and we'll say, yeah, that guy is kinda underrated, if we remember him at all. And here's why we think this. You see, this sort of thinking is nothing new if you are familiar with our content on this channel. If we go ahead and take a look back at the main antagonists of Super, discounting the Z movie retellings since they are pretty much par for the course these days, we have the likes of Zamasu, and Goku Black technically as well, Jiren, Broly, and Moro. Two of which are not really beings that you could consider full-on villains, they're more like antagonists rather than proper baddies. Their bad campaign doesn't last long, and arguably they look better as allies anyway going forward. That's Jiren and Broly, by the way. Zamasu's and Goku's Black's biggest sin is that they would work better as two separate characters, honestly. And they tend to be overcomplicated when it comes to their overall approach to matters. We said this back when this was new, when it was airing, that the Dragon Room were trying to go for something quite deep and philosophical, about the workings and morals of justice, and what you could consider justice and truth. But that was a little bit lost in the time travel plot holes and placement in the schedule. In short, it was a little too profound for Dragon Ball, and it was also not done as well as it could have been. It was muddled. Then there is Moro, and whilst we appreciate the inclusion of magic and dark arts within Dragon Ball, the first time properly since Barbary, you can easily boil him down to the sole fact that he's just an evil guy, nothing more. There's no flashpoint or moment of clarity where he changed his ways for the worse. He was simply a constantly nasty person, and after a very promising start, he winds up just being a mere cell palette swap. Though having said that, having merged with the planet Earth will always be looked back on and deemed cool. Weird, but cool. You won't be forgetting that one in a hurry, despite the constant nods to Marvel from Toyotaro's part. Can you tell he's a big fan of theirs? So now we have Gas. What do we make of him? Well, this is where things are already starting to look a little bit bleak for Gas as a character in the long run. Sure, he has started to show signs of independent thought and likes and desires, but if we wanted to be more exact with our description of him, we really should be labeling the present villain or action as Elec using Gas as a weapon, not Gas fighting on his own terms. Even when you take into account his own desires to beat Goku and by proxy Bardock. Elec though ultimately gave the order and powers to Gas to do his bidding, which is hilarious when you consider that his whole thing is materializing weapons out of thin air. He himself is a weapon! What does that say about the character? You could easily call him a tool and not a lot of people out there would be jumping up and down calling you unfair. You'd have a point. Okay, Masako, you're not really giving Gas a leg to stand on, so can you be a little bit fairer? Okay, so what do we like about Gas, and why did we come up with this rather weird thesis about him? Well, for starters, he is worth talking about to some degree. He's certainly no random poacher that 17 and Goku had to fight for some reason one time and then was never seen again. No. Gas seems to be quite a decent mix of an entity who has enough sympathetic material going for him as to not make him simply a mindless killing machine. And yet he is not overly complicated or overblown like a certain green-skinned fella. Oh, for the love of Kami, will you stop crying? Seriously, it's been nearly 6 years with him now. Get over it. Gas does have a clear motivation going for him that we can easily find in the story. He does have his rivalry with Granolah from way back, as well as bad memories after being beaten up by Bardock, the last person who had soundly defeated him in his ultimate form. But he also cares enough for his own kin, thanks to his bizarre sense of honor, to give our thesis some legs. Legs, mind you, that still hold him, Oil and Maki in a somewhat redeemable position, unlike Elec. Oh yeah, Elec gonna die at the end of this. You just know it. He'll be answering for all of that he has done up to now. Granolah's gonna be making sure of that anyway. And as for his powers, they are pretty cool? Don't get us wrong. Part of being a modern Dragon Ball fan is connected to the very basic question. Should a phrase new for Dragon Ball be a thing? Because if you think about it, a lot about the Super era of the show is us talking not new within pop culture, but new for Dragon Ball. Should we really be making that excuse for the show anymore? Well, that's up to personal preference. But when I see a guy hitting Goku with a train, I'm all for it. And, you know, since the Heeters are kind of a reflection of Frieza, which this saga is all about, different characters reflecting each other, his Predator-like look makes sense. His brief Broly-like state was not needed though. That was purely derivative and really didn't bring anything new to the table other than plenty of Broly fan service and comparisons. But luckily for us, this wasn't taking up too much of our time. It was a flash in the pan thing. It felt like a temporary release rather than a constant. Once Gas had gotten on top of this and had freedom to use said power, he was able to calm down and regain his composure. Much like how Kale had done in the Tournament of Power. Perhaps Gas is the true male Kale instead of Broly. Questions for another video though. But when you really stop to think about Gas, what with all the cool stuff that he has done so far, he is harder to put next to the big hitters like Zamasu, Moro, or Jiren. Even with all the critiques that we gave those characters over the years, at least we remember them. There is something about Gas though that will forever cast him with the fact that he's a being that shall henceforth stand in the shadows. It wasn't really hard to figure out this chestnut either. Gas's revelation wasn't a surprise in the slightest. Since the Heeters were first introduced, we knew that he was going to be the main physical threat of the arc. Despite Granolah putting up a big case for himself with his power and fighting the Saiyans, with Gas we saw this coming a mile off. and Dragon Ball has a history of the real main antagonists showing up relatively late on the scene, with Cell and Kid Buu being some of the best examples of this. So why is it that Gas, who is arguably written better than the likes of Jiren or Moro, not make an impact? Is it connected to the simple fact that he is, as we stated earlier, a mere weapon for another character who is more interesting, curiously, due to being one of those 2 instances of big bads not being physically threatening themselves? Is it connected to the additional fact that he seems to be almost too redeemable, and yet probably won't be? If you think about it, most redeemable villains fall into one of 2 categories, and most of them fit both: a hard upbringing and a rivalry with the main character, usually Goku. Seriously, you can take anyone from Tenshinhan through Piccolo, Vegeta, the androids. They'll check one of those boxes at least. While you may argue that the Heeters live in comfort and luxury, it is clear that some of them get a shorter end of the stick than Elec. Also, he has a rivalry with this chapter's protagonist, and not Goku. If you told us that Gas was going to reform himself, we would believe you. He has enough stuff going for him for that to pan out. So why, and we're almost certain of this, will Gas not be the thing that we will immediately recall about this saga, when we will think back in this in a few years, when we will inevitably remind ourselves about this? There is one thing though we haven't mentioned as of yet, and some of you may have realised or seen this coming a mile off before we even say it. But as of the writing of the script, chapter 81, Gas is still technically the strongest in the universe. Despite all the train hitting, weapon materialization, his groundedness is working against him. It's so funny, because we really wanted a grounded Dragon Ball opponent, haven't I? But when we actually get one, it kind of makes them into simply being a fine character. Nothing else, you know? They're fine. They're okay. Even Jiren, as boring as his backstory was, feels kind of extravagant when you take a look at him. He has a clear following too, striking you with the design of a bulky grey alien, subverting the usual alien tropes of them being short and scrawny. It's great. Gas? He's okay, I guess. And that's the problem. He's the strongest guy in the universe, and yet he doesn't give off the vibe of being that. Jiren did. Oh boy, Jiren did. Moro? Oh yeah, you didn't want to mess with Moro. Gas? And that's what you get when you wish for said powers. Or when somebody wishes those powers on you. Gas didn't earn these powers, so why should we honor him like he had? Again, it's mostly because this really isn't his story either, and he is more of a narrative tool for Granolah and the Saiyans to overcome. And that's a real shame, because in any other saga, Gas would be a welcome sight, but here, again, he's just a guy. There's nothing particularly wrong about Gas. He does some cool stuff within the story, but that's it. He doesn't really leave much more of an impact. Still though, we do like Gas, but we're afraid that he may end up on a shelf next to the likes of Dr. Giro, Android 19, Deborah, and Raditz. We're hoping though for a small sub-story with a Dragon Ball Heroes universe feature sometime, and that's a shame in of itself. Hopefully we're wrong, but as we get closer to the end of the saga, please remember Gas. He has all the traits that could make him a really standout character. He was just unlucky is all. But what do you folks reckon? Could we be wrong? Is there more to Gas that we're simply missing? If you like this discussion, check out this one right here, where we propose that there are 12 things about the Super Manga that are better than the anime. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!